how do we get healthy? We spend a lot of time helping us understand how complex trauma made us unhealthy, that the very skills we needed to survive actually made for an unhealthy adult life. So how now do we get healthy? What does that look like? And what are the tools to get to being healthy? So we've been looking at the different needs that we all have and how complex trauma changes how we go about meeting those needs to meeting them in unhealthy ways. And then what are the tools to meet that need in a healthy way? So we're going to come to justice tonight. And for some of you, you might think, this sounds boring. I don't think it affects me. I would say after my years as a counselor in this field, that most clients that I work with are surprised at how big this justice issue is for them. And I think you'll probably find that with yourself. In fact, I've had some clients tell me that their hyper need for justice has led them to relapses over and over again. It just gets them in such an obsessive and then negative headspace that it takes them out. So let me begin by just defining what we're going to be talking about, and then I want to come at it from a bunch of different directions. So everybody who's a parent knows that seems to be one of the very first things kids learn how to say is it's not fair. And they have this internal thing that they were born with that somehow has a sense of what is fair, and they have a radar that detects anything that isn't fair, and when something's not fair, you hear about it. And they cry, they get mad, and if you look at that radar, I think what is built into every one of us is, and so if you look at it through the eyes of a child, I want to be treated like everybody else. And so if I want to be treated a certain way, then it's fair to expect that others should be treated the certain way. So if they're treated this way, then it's fair. I should be treated this way. So that becomes a standard. And if some person is treated different or better than you go, that's not fair. And so if you take that a little bit further, something in us has this thing about what's fair, but it's if something violates love. So if somebody lies to me, somebody is unkind to me, somebody hits me, that means something wrong has been done. And if something wrong's been done, there needs to be a consequence, and in a child's mind, it should be punished. Now, the problem with the child is they want everybody else to be punished, but when it comes to them committing that same crime, they don't want to be punished. They want a double standard very early on. But justice is recognizing we have somewhere in us a moral compass that is determined by what is loving, and if something violates that, then we get a reaction. And that reaction is usually an anger reaction, and then getting aggressive and fighting for fair. So when you think about that, think about today. How can that be triggered in somebody in recovery, this need for justice? So if you see somebody in recovery that phones in work every day and you work on the same job, but they phone in quite regularly saying they're sick, and you know they're not sick, and everybody knows they're not sick, but they never have any consequences. You go, that's not fair. That person should be getting consequences because they're ripping the company off and they're doing stuff that is not really good for them or anybody else. And then it can get triggered. Let's say that somebody hurts your kid and the school does nothing about it. Well, you are down in that office. You're phoning the TV stations and the radio stations wanting to get justice for your kid because there was no consequence when something wrong happened to them. And so that is the mama bear instinct that comes out to protect them, and you know that to protect them, there has to be justice. The other thing that can happen is, let's say your kid comes home 5 minutes late and you say, grounded for 2 months and you have no internet or phone privileges for 2 months. And they go, come on, that's not fair. And when a penalty doesn't fit the crime, so there's consequences, it's just like you bring out a sledgehammer to kill a fly. You go, that's just a little bit overdone. Then you go, that's not fair. So that is another trigger. So that is justice. Now, think about it in terms of our culture today. We are one of the few cultures left where corruption is not just the normal way the government operates. Sadly, we're starting to become more and more corrupt, and you might think we're already way far gone, but we live in a culture where justice is being lost. And that scares me, because what we're going to see is when there's no justice, then that culture is no longer safe. And so if you look at our culture today, if you have money, you can buy a special lawyer who can get you off the hook on almost anything. So you can avoid justice if you have enough money, or if you're famous, you'll often get a free pass because nobody wants you to get in trouble because everybody adores you. So that is happening. And then, sadly, we get corrupt judges, corrupt policemen, corrupt lawyers, all that are bought off by corrupt people. And then we live in a world now where you have the justice system, but then underneath that you have street justice. And street justice we're going to talk a bit more about, but it's basically don't rat me out or you'll be killed. And so people are afraid to push for justice in neighborhoods where that street justice is enforced. And then we still have lack of equality due to your race or your gender, which is not just. And so we live in a world where justice is being lost. And that is a very scary thing. Now, I want to go further to how does complex trauma play into this whole topic of justice. So again, you can mark the things that were true of your family, but what you're going to see is that complex trauma families usually don't have a very good or consistent or fair justice system. And there's a whole bunch of ways that justice can go wrong in a complex trauma family. So you could have a dad that if you did something wrong, you got severe punishment, but if he did the same thing, he minimized what he did wrong, or he denied that he even did wrong, or he rationalized that he did wrong, or he distorted it to make it your fault. And so justice wasn't done in those cases to the person in authority. They could find a way to make it somebody else's fault, and so there ended up being a double standard. The person in authority had a different standard enforced than everybody else did. And that, for a child, you can see it. You see the hypocrisy of a dad that is saying you should never lie, and then he lies, and then you get angry about it. But if you express your anger, you get a severe punishment, which is more unfairness, lack of true justice. Then you might have had a brother or a sister that dad favored, and so they could get away with murder, but you couldn't. And so that wasn't a good justice system, and that hurt, and that created a lot of anger. And then you could have been in a family where there were rules, but they were inconsistently enforced, and then the consequences were inconsistent in how they were delivered. And so sometimes the rules were enforced, sometimes they weren't, sometimes there were consequences, sometimes there weren't. Again, that's not a consistent, healthy justice system. And so what a child has to do there is try and get a radar system that goes, what kind of mood is dad in today? Or what kind of mood is mom in today? Because if they're in a good mood, we can get away with murder today. And you learn how to play that system. Another thing that happens in complex trauma which is a tragic thing, is the bar is set for a child's behavior that is too high. So a child is expected to be able to do everything perfectly the first time. And so if they do something and they make a mess, or it takes them too long to learn, they get punished for that. And it's an unfair system because it doesn't factor in the age of the child, where they're at in their development, and children then are punished when they really haven't done anything wrong. They're just being a child. You could have had a child who broke the rules, had a consequence delivered to them, but they had a way of manipulating the situation to wiggle out of the consequences, or to get dad to change the rules in their case. And that can drive you crazy. Next, you could have had a parent who is very prejudiced or very biased. And so they were just negative about certain people groups. They had all of their opinions about them that weren't fair, but they lashed out, and you witnessed that as part of growing up. So what I hope you see is that complex trauma and justice, the need for justice, don't go together. And so children with this need for justice end up with a need that is not met well. And so they then have to develop their own way of trying to get justice. So what usually happens in a child where they don't have justice is, what I say is, when a child's basic need is not met, it creates a hyper need. So what I have seen for many people coming out of complex trauma is they develop a hypersensitivity to injustice. They have this highly tuned radar that picks up the slightest little injustice that exists. And so they can be drawn into every cause going, and all of them can be great causes, but they just burn themselves up, get themselves worked up with anger about the latest injustice, and totally forget about their own recovery. And so that can be a huge issue. But just be aware that if you never had healthy justice growing up, there's a good chance you have a hypersensitivity to injustice today. And that could give you some trouble. Okay, so having said that, I just want to teach a little bit about justice, okay? So I want to come at this from a couple main points, but the first one is this, and I think you'll readily understand it. But if there's no justice in society, that means some people are judged too harshly and others get away with stuff, which means society becomes a place where evil can grow in certain areas. And as evil grows, it can begin to take over a culture. So without justice, you create a spawning ground for the growth of evil. And then, as evil spreads and there's no justice, society becomes more and more unsafe. So if you were to go into a part of our city where there's not much justice, and basically gangs can rule and all of that, it no longer becomes a safe place because of the lack of justice. So another way to say all of that is, if there's no justice, there's no true peace. Now let me explain that, okay? You have to think of this in terms of short-term and long-term. So if you go into a ratting type of mindset, so a gang-dominated neighborhood, people say, if I want peace for my family, don't rat out the person, okay? And so to them, that delivers peace. The problem with that is, in the long run, nobody will have any peace at all. So you might get short-term peace, but it's not true peace. True peace can only take place where there's true justice. And that is really hard when you're in that kind of environment, because you are in survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, your limbic brain is only concerned about short-term safety, protection. You don't care long-term. You just want to be safe now. But it's important to back away from that. Say, okay, let's play this tape out to the end. How is this going to turn out if I continue to live for just short-term safety and therefore never rat somebody out? So what that I want you then to see is this. Justice is the result of fighting for truth and love as the two most important things in society. Now, let me give you an example. I have heard many, many people say to me, I will be there for my family no matter what. Family comes first. And what that means is if somebody in my family committed a great crime, I would never try to get justice for them. I will lie for them. I will not answer questions for them because family comes first. And what I say is when that happens, love and justice come second. And as soon as love and justice come second, you set up for an unjust society. Love and truth, I meant. So if love and truth are the highest priorities, then I go, we have to keep people in line with love and truth, or else we're going to lose our society. Society is going to become not safe, and evil will spread if love and truth aren't the highest priorities. So that might be kind of brand new way of looking at it, but I hope it makes sense, and I hope you can give it some thought. Okay, next thing I want you to realize is, why don't we fight for justice? And there's reasons why. It's not necessarily that we think it's a bad idea, but there's a couple key reasons why we don't fight for justice. Number one, we're afraid to. Because I could get myself in big trouble with the wrong people if I start fighting for justice. Or another way to say that is this. To fight for justice will always invite opposition. You're not going to have a row full of cheerleaders saying, way to go. You're fighting for justice. You're going, I thought you cared about me. You're stabbing me in the back. And you're going to get persecution and opposition, which creates fear. Secondly, if you have a lot of shame, which deep down is, I don't like me and I don't think anybody else will if they get to know the real me. So the way I get people to like me is be a people pleaser. And so I can never fight for justice because I need everybody to like me. So I'll cover for everybody, I'll lie for everybody, because getting me liked is the highest priority. And that will get in the way of justice. So let me give you this. Realize that to truly love a person, you have to desire justice for them. Now that's going to sound totally backwards to street thinking. But if I truly love my kids and they did something wrong, do you want to know the best thing for them is a consequence? If I take their consequence away from them, they're never going to grow up. That means I am not loving them. I'm enabling them to be sick. But love says, I care enough about you that I'm going to make some hard decisions so that you learn some hard lessons and become a good person. You might not like me. It might feel like I don't love you, and you might accuse me of not loving you, but I love you. And that is the highest expression of love for a person. So you can see then that it takes a lot of courage to love somebody when justice has to be part of that equation. And that is really what it calls for, is that courage. Okay, so justice, another way to look at it, is saying, if you look at a roadway, the center of the roadway is healthy living. And healthy living is doing things that are loving. So you're being honest, you're being faithful, you're being reliable. All of those are loving, healthy behaviors. To step into unhealthy usually gives pleasure. So you tell a lie, you eat way too much ice cream tonight, you do all of those things that go into unhealthy, they give immediate gratification. But they're going to destroy you in the long run. So how do you help a person, child, adult, to realize that unhealthy living is not worth it? That it will be something that will create great damage in the future. You enforce a consequence for going into unhealthy. And that's what justice is saying. There needs to be a consequence when a person steps into unhealthy. And so the goal of that is not punishment. And I think that's important to understand, because a lot of people, when they think of justice, all they think about is punishing. Do you know the difference between punishment and discipline? Punishment says, I want to hurt you back as an end in itself. I don't care if you die there. I don't care if one good thing. The priority is I want to hurt you. Discipline is there's going to be painful consequences so that you'll get out of there and get healthy again. So it's always with a desire as a way to get a person back to healthy growth. And so justice, if it's just punishment, that's not true justice. True justice says, I want consequences so you learn the lessons and you never do that again so that you become healthier. And so that becomes an important way to look at justice. So take cultures of injustice. Realize that as more and more people have to live in survival mode, punishments all the time. When you live in survival mode, do you want to know what begins to happen in a society? Nobody has time to just enjoy nature. Nobody has time to just develop hobbies and beauty. Life is all about just trying to survive. And so as justice disappears, not only does society become unsafe, but society is driven to survival mode. And so there's no advances in understanding, education, business, technology, because survival mode takes over. So let me end this part here with talking about punishment versus discipline, true justice. So somebody said this, do justice, but justice that has mercy. Justice that loves mercy. What is street justice? An eye for an eye. You hurt me, I hurt you. And it's all about basically punishment. But another way to say that, it's all about never-ending revenge. That becomes the definition of justice. Is there any mercy in there? Is there any desire to see a person change and become better? No, the goal is to hurt you as much as you hurt me. And it ends with that. And that is the tragedy. Now, take it a bit further. What's always fascinating in a street culture is the gang leader enforces brutal justice on everybody, but he gets away with everything. So there's a double standard. And whenever there's a double standard, there's not going to be true justice. But what I want you to understand is justice by eye for eye type of thinking without any mercy at all becomes nothing more than war and revenge. And it never is a good thing. So there needs to be a mercy, discipline element. Now, a couple more things just to fill out your thinking. As I was thinking about this, there's 4 things that are part of life that are all about justice being a priority. So parents, believe it or not, one of the things that a healthy parent is supposed to do is to create a family that is fair and just. Boundaries are consistent. Consequences are consistent. Consequences are fair. It's a learning from failure, not a punishment. That is the parent's job. Then we have a conscience. And whenever we do something that violates love, something in here starts bugging us. And it picks away at us and saying, I'm going to make you have some pain internally because you're living in unhealthy. And then the third thing is the government. One of the main purposes of the government has been to keep society just and to have laws and the enforcement of laws to keep society safe. Sadly, that can be disappearing in most cultures in our world today. And number 4, there used to be a popular saying that every child needs a village to be raised. And what they were saying is you can't have police everywhere, but you can have neighbors that care. And you can have neighbors with the same value systems as parents, and they're going to make sure that justice doesn't just happen in the home, but in the neighborhood. And the neighborhood will be kept as a safe place. Okay, final thing on this part. One of the hardest things about living in our world today is we need to desire justice, but we have to accept that not every situation will be just. So somewhere we got to figure out how to live within injustice that we don't have any control over. Okay, now let's go to justice and recovery. So I talked about this hypersensitivity, and that I've watched people in recovery where something happens to their kids, something happens to another addict that they become friends with, and they just get obsessed with this, and then they get super angry, and then they're running off in 100 directions, and before you know it, they relapse. So be aware, if you're like that you don't become obsessed. I talked to somebody not too long ago, and I basically said to them, you've got 99% of recovery down. But when there's an injustice anywhere, you go off the rails. You can't sleep at night. You are just angry all the time. You get negative, and before you know it, you've relapsed. So until you learn how to let go and detach from some of that stuff and keep your focus on your recovery, you're going to be in trouble with this injustice thing. And so that just as a warning to you in your own recovery. So part of recovery is this. It's learning how to care appropriately about people going through unjust situations without becoming obsessed. And that's a skill you're going to have to learn and figure out, but it is a really important skill. And so what I say to some clients is this: not everybody in early recovery is strong enough to engage in trying to help somebody in an injustice. It sucks them in like a whirlpool. So you have to be aware of how weak you are, and you might just have to say to some people in your early recovery, I care, but sorry, I can't get involved. And that's going to feel cruel and unkind, but if you lose your recovery, you can't help anyways. So you have to be very aware of how much you can take on and know your limitations and how vulnerable you are. There's another part of recovery. When you fail, you want to know what your justice says? I got to punish myself. So I'm going to get out a great big whip, and I'm going to whip myself until I've punished myself enough for the latest failure. How's that been working for you? Usually not very well. Part of what you have to do in recovery when you fail is change it from punishment to discipline, from punishment to mercy, and say, I'm not going to beat myself up. I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to turn this into a growing experience. That is the right kind of justice. Then there's another characteristic of a lot of people in recovery, and that is I need to do my recovery perfect. So if I'm not doing it perfectly, then I'm failing. And then I got to beat myself up. And so be aware of the bar, the standard you set for yourself. Is it realistic or unrealistic? And for many people in early recovery, the bar they set for themselves is totally unrealistic, and you set yourself up for failure. Okay, there's always going to be injustices, but what are some practical tools that we can take away? So a couple things. You realize that justice doesn't start by you creating a perfect world. Justice starts internally. And so the starting place for you is that you're not living by a double standard if you're in a position of authority. That when you're in a position of authority, you make that sure the rules are fair. They're not just set to make your life easier. The rules are about what's best for everybody. So you are in a position of authority where you are setting a just system within the family and living by it internally. Let me take that further. Realize that almost on a weekly basis, I will get somebody come to me and say, that person did something terrible. Now, what they're hoping is I'm going to put on my judge's robe and go to them and say, you are banned to this punishment, and they want me to make it severe. But here's what I've learned. What would happen if I went to that person who I say I care about and I want the best for, and I didn't take the time to make sure I understood every detail clearly so I wasn't missing or misrepresenting anything? They would say I wasn't being just because I didn't take the time to understand everything going on. So the danger often as parents is our kids get triggered, which triggers us, and then we run off and do a whole bunch of knee-jerk reactions, and we haven't taken time to find out the facts. And we haven't taken time to make sure we understand all the different points of view. And so if you want to create justice, you got to put energy into understanding. You can't just say, I'm dad, so I'm the boss, I'm the judge. That's not a fair judge system. Children need to know you're checking out their side of the story very carefully, or else you will hurt them and do a lot of damage. Third thing, evaluate your beliefs. Evaluate some of the biases that you might have. One of the things that many children get is a dad or mom that says it's my way or the highway. Dad never challenges any of his own beliefs. Nobody's allowed to challenge his beliefs. He just says, here's the rules, and my mind is closed to any other information. Don't be like that. Challenge your own beliefs. Challenge your assumptions. Challenge your biases. Because if those are bad, you will not have justice for your children and your family. If you're at a place in recovery where you think, I'm strong enough now, I want to start to help some people who are in unjust situations, educate yourself first before you go charging in, and then figure out how you can be supportive and helpful, and then you might even volunteer in helping right some injustices. So, I don't know, is justice an issue for you? I hope you see that it potentially could be a huge issue, and I hope you're able to kind of learn some stuff about justice so that you can become a just person and create justice within your family.